and afternoon, but it's all in the best interest of the citizens we serve, and we want to get this thing right. So can I get a motion to approve the minutes for the agenda session? It's been moved and properly second. All in favor? Sign of aye. All in favor? Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Okay, the ordinances, we have two ordinances on final reading. Is there anything we need to do? Any questions regarding those two items? They've already been read into the records. If not, we will move on to, Councilman Ledford.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to, I made this question at 1:30. Just wanted to ask the city attorney to make sure that we had moved the appeals process to the SV.
Yes, sir. Based upon the amendment last week, there is an amendment that has created the passenger vehicle for hire board.
Okay.
As the board that will hear any appeals from this group.
Very good.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman Ledford. Okay, now we'll move on to ordinance on first reading. 6A, and this ordinance was actually read last week. Councilman Gilbert. Hit your button again, sir, I'm sorry. Okay, you have the floor.
Chair, based off some of my colleagues had some concerns about, for as people speaking, which I have that same concern, they need to speak. I'm gonna defer this to 1 week, but Chair, I also want from you that if any ordinance or resolution that even is time sensitive, or we still follow all the rules from now on. Can we get that, sir, for us in the future?
Yes.
We go if it's time sensitive or not.
Yes, Councilman, we will follow the rules of procedure. And,
Well, I'll refer this at 6 o'clock then.
Okay, thank you. And with the help of with the city attorney, we will do our best to follow that. Thank you, Councilman Gilbert. Councilman Ledford.
I'm good, Chairman. I thought we were still on B. I apologize.
Okay, Madam Clerk, would you read Resolution 7A, please?
A resolution authorizing the waiver of fees for the CHA Learning Days and Early Childhood Resource Event sponsored by WTCI at Miller Park on May 14, 2019, in the amount of $200.
Thank you. Would you please read B?
A resolution authorizing the Chief Human Resources Officer to enter into an agreement with Gallagher Benefits Services, Inc. to conduct a compensation study and implementation support for the City of Chattanooga for an amount not to exceed $150,000.
Seeing no questions, C, please.
A resolution authorizing payment to the Southeast Tennessee Development District for 2019 assessment dues in the amount of $35,211.54, and the Regional Tourism Initiative in the amount of $5,000 for an amount not to exceed $40,211.54.
Okay, thank you. The next items under Public Works and Transportation, D, E, and F was read last week. Is there any questions this week? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That will conclude this part of the agenda session. We have no departmental report. Now, at this time, I will turn the meeting over to Councilman Ledford with Planning and Zoning Committee. Councilman Ledford. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Planning and Zoning. May I get approval for the minutes? Thank you. All right, moving into ordinances on first reading. Mr. Bridger, how are we today?
Doing great, thank you, sir.
Fantastic. Let's jump right into 6A.
Sure. This is a request to rezone a property from M1 manufacturing zone to M2 light industrial zone to accommodate some driver dormitories and training facility associated with Covenant Transport, which is located in Lookout Valley. Again, if you look at the land use of the area, it's pretty much, it's surrounded by industrial. It is within the main industrial campus of Covenant Transport. There is some residential to the west, but it's on the other side of I-24. If you look at the zoning, you can see again the entire site is surrounded by M1 zoning. The reason I happen to go to M2 is you cannot have any residential in an M1 zone. And so the M2 allows them to have dormitories for training for their staff. There is no zoning history for this site. The closest M2 zone is adjacent to this parcel to the east. Again, here you see the site plan that was submitted where they're proposing to construct the dormitory and training facilities to the southwest of the main building, again within their industrial campus. Here's another picture of the location. There will be no new curb cuts. They'll use the existing curb cut off of Birmingham Highway. The Lookout Valley Land Use Plan recommends manufacturing and industrial for this location. So you can see this basically adds up. No issues with land use, zoning, consistent with the land use plan, so staff recommended to approve. At Planning Commission, there was no opposition. Planning Commission concurred with staff's recommendation to approve.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Bridger. Councilman Henderson, you have anything? Very good. Thank you. John, 6B.
Okay. This is a request to rezone a piece of property from R4 Special Zone and R1 Residential Zone to R4 Special Zone for a multifamily residential development for 38 residential units. The property is located at 1514 Shelby Circle at the intersection of Shelby Circle and Middle Valley Road. The property is currently vacant, as you see here. If you look at the land use, to the north you have a townhouse development. To the east, you have the Valley Brook subdivision and a single-family residential. To the south, you have large lot single-family residential. Across the street, you have a combination of vacant large tract and a commercial structure on the northwest corner of Lower Mill Road and Middle Valley Road. Here are some pictures looking into the site. They're proposing to have, upper right is the site itself. Upper left shows you looking out onto Middle Valley Road. Lower left, you see the townhouses across the street, and on the bottom right, you see adjacent commercial on the other corner. Here's a zoning map. Shows that a portion of the site is currently zoned R4. The back half is currently zoned R1, and that's the reason for the rezoning request. They're wanting to rezone the entire site to accommodate their development proposal. There is some zoning history with this location. In 1984, there was a request to rezone a portion of this property to C2 commercial zone. Staff recommended to deny but approve R4, which was approved, and that's why you see a portion of the site zoned R4. And then across the street to the north, there was a request to rezone from C2 to R1 for a townhouse development. And as you see to the north there, a townhouse development has since been developed to the north of this site. If you look at the site itself, it is outside the floodplain. It is low, but it's outside of the 100-year floodplain. This is the site plan. The site plan shows, I think it's important to note that the primary entrance is off of Middle Valley Road, not Shelby Circle. It shows 3 apartment buildings with parking in the middle of the site. The dumpster, as proposed in this drawing, shows it on Shelby Circle Drive. In the back third, if you see the kind of upper middle of the site plan, they're showing at this point in the process, the site plan showed a 10-foot buffer to the east, which is currently required by the landscape regulations in terms of how you would buffer a apartment building next to single-family residential. The land use plan, the Hickson land use plan, adopted in 2005, recommends a mix of single-unit residential and light business mix. This is a zoom in of that site. You can see the corner is suggested as a light business mix and the rear single family. When staff looked at this request, we look at a combination of factors. We look at the land use plan recommendation. We look at existing development patterns and zoning patterns. Staff looking at the land use pattern, development pattern, felt that extension of the residential or multifamily would be appropriate up to a certain depth, but not necessarily going all the way with R4. R4 zone allows other uses beyond apartments that could have more of an impact on the adjacent residential. So staff recommended basically to deny the R4, but approve R3, subject to several conditions to address any off-site impacts. One is that residential units would not exceed 38, limit the building height to 2.5 stories or 35 feet, make sure that dumpster for that site is spaced away from the adjacent residential to the east. So we recommended it be along the northern property line on Shelby Circle and a minimum of 70 feet away from the eastern property. That's where most of your residential is. Then also to provide a type B landscape buffer. So that's a little more than what the applicant was originally proposing. A type B would be 20 feet instead of 10. At Planning Commission, there was no opposition. I do have a follow-up comment on this, which I'll note in a minute. But at Planning Commission, there was no opposition. So after Planning Commission heard staff's recommendation and comments from the applicant, they went with staff's recommendation with the exception, well, with two modifications. They clarified the dumpster location still had the same distance, but didn't have to be on the street. And they took away basically the 20-foot buffer recommendation that staff recommended. So it came with that recommendation with those three conditions. I will note that we received several calls after the Planning Commission meeting. Some residents were not aware of this case, and so said they would have opposed it had it come to Planning Commission. I know we communicated with the applicant and Councilman Smith. We connected the applicant to meet with the residents. I know there's been some communication between them. I'm not sure where that stands at this point, but I know they've been in communication. So that's all I've got at this point.
Thank you, John, and thank you for, since Councilman Smith is not here today, I think there's some work probably to be done during the next week. The folks that contacted you do know they'll have a chance to speak on this.
Yes, they do. I've had several calls. We told them that they had an opportunity to speak at City Council next week.
Very good. Just want to make sure that message was relayed. Thank you for that report. Let's move on to 6C.
Okay. This is a request to rezone from R2 residential to UGC commercial to accommodate a mixed-use development that features apartments and possible commercial. The property is located in the Cedar Hill community at near the intersection of 10th Street and 44th Street. If you can see the property, actually let me go into the pictures. You can see the building there. It's a red brick building, so you can see that it is a commercial type, shop front type building, not your typical residential dwelling. It's surrounded, it does have some residential across the street to the south. To the east, you do have a duplex, but I would say the predominant character in the immediate vicinity is low-density residential. The zoning in this area is currently R2. You do have some C2 to the north and to the east. A UGC was approved further to the north, about 0.17 miles on East 42nd Street. The site plan indicates, again, they're planning to retain the building just to reuse it, to convert it to apartments with a possible commercial use on the ground floor with parking provided to the rear. The land use plan for the area is the Rossville Boulevard plan adopted in 2004, recommends a light business mix, which includes a mix of office, commercial, and limited residential uses. So taking all that together, thinking about that there are residential dwellings in the immediate vicinity, but you do have an existing commercial type structure. The main concern with UGC, it's the right zone in terms of form, but it has other uses that may not be appropriate for the single-family residential in the area. So staff recommended to approve subject to basically two conditions. One, retain the existing structure, and two, limit the uses to residential, office, and retail sales and service only. There was opposition present at Planning Commission. The opposition were actually, I believe, were tenants of the building and had some concerns with the landlord, but that really didn't have anything as it relates to the specific zoning case in mind. The Planning Commission did ask that the applicant meet with the tenants to resolve whatever those issues were, but they concur with staff's recommendation to retain the existing structure and those use restrictions that I mentioned.
Very good. Councilman Oglesby, do you have anything anything you'd like to say on this particular case? I will. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I have done some follow-up, and there seemed to be some consensus, but you're absolutely right. It's really a little bit more not related to whether or not this is approved or not, but this is a good project for this area, and we'll move forward next week.
So thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Very
Chair.
good. Thank you, sir. John, this is UGC with the conditions will move this particular property into compliance.
That's correct.
If I remember correctly.
Yes, that is.
Yeah, okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, this next request is in the Ridgedale community. It's a request to rezone a piece of property from RTZ, residential townhouse zone, to R3 to accommodate a cottage court-style residential development. This is something we're starting to see more of in the city, again, as a way to meet the city's diversifying housing needs. Basically, think of it as a series of small residential buildings sharing a common courtyard in an urban context. And to do that, you need the R3 zone, because the R3 allows to have multiple units on one lot. So if you look at the property itself, again, it's vacant. This is, again, at the intersection of Vance and Willow Street in Ridgedale. You do have a mix of residential types. To the north, you have single-family. To the east, you have single-family. But across the street, you do have an existing multifamily residential structure on this block. Here again, you can see the pictures. On the top, you see looking into the site. On the bottom, you see on lower left is what's across the street, an existing multifamily residential structure, and you have single-family homes to the east. If you see the zoning, the entire area is zoned R3. This site is currently zoned RTZ. At the time, they actually requested to rezone it from R3 to RTZ with the understanding that they could do a multi-unit development with this project, but getting some more clarification, working with LDO staff, and I think also it's actually something that went to, there's some things that went to the variance board in terms of interpretation of multiple units in RTZ. Be that as it may, long story, the discovery was that R3 was really the best zone that would work with the type of development form they were proposing. So it's a zone that's intended for multiple units on one lot. So if you have questions about that, I'll be free to follow up on that. So I mentioned the zoning history on that, so I won't get into that. Here is the site plan. So again, you see the site plan. It has several residential structures on one large parcel with a common courtyard, parking off to the side, coming off of a rear alley. The Ridgedale plan recommends mixed residential for this location, so that's consistent with the Ridgedale plan recommendation. So staff, again, noted that the request to rezone from RTZ to R3 would revert it back to what its original zoning was, and this request provides a variety of housing types, which is consistent with the plan recommendations. We did want to recommend some conditions, since, as you know, anytime you rezone, unless you have conditions, it won't, in terms of governing the form that would be developed. So we recommended 5 conditions. One, that vehicular access and parking would be located in the rear, no more than 5 dwelling units, had a maximum building height, noting the common open space that would be part of this development. And those residential units, in the 5th condition, those residential units that front Vance need to orient themselves both to the courtyard and to the street of Vance Avenue. There was no opposition at Planning Commission. After hearing from the staff and the applicant, Planning Commission modified some of the language, mainly the 5th condition. The 5th condition by staff originally said that there would be entries onto Vance as well as the courtyard. The applicant said that really wasn't realistic given the size of the buildings they're developing. Having 2 doors was not going to work. So Planning Commission modified that condition, took that out. And with that, recommended approval with those conditions. I will say, since this case was approved, I had a conversation with the applicant. There's one other detail that's important, is that the porches, which will face onto the courtyard, they also, a portion of the facade and that faces Vance will have a small porch, but not across the entire facing. So they want to be sure that they weren't required to put a porch across the entire Vance-facing facade as well as the courtyard.
Is that a
So
cut-in
there was some
porch?
language clarification there.
Is that a cut-in porch?
Yes, that is correct.
Very good.
So, so there's a modification which I will certainly, I mean, I'll bring to the attention of the city attorney. We can have some draft language for your consideration for next week on first reading.
Very good. Thank you, John. Councilwoman Coonrod, do you have any comments on this case? It's in your district? Ask and you shall receive. All right. John, that's our last item. We have a
You have a text amendment, then
coming
a
up
PUD.
next.
Yeah, so the text amendment is actually related to this case. In the R3 zone, currently, let me say this, currently in RTZ, which is like our townhouse small residential lot zone. If y'all recall the urban overlay zone is that ridge to river area where we have our grid of streets. It gives you reduced setbacks because we know those were older historic developments that had smaller lots and buildings were closer together. So in R1 and RTZ, they gave you some exceptions to the standard setbacks in the urban overlay. Well, we didn't include R3. And so all this does is apply the same setback standards, variances that you get in R1 and RTZ to R3. That's all we're doing. So the change essentially is the front setback will be determined by looking at the range of front setbacks on that block that you're in. So you're trying to fit in with the existing residential structures on the front. And then you get a 5-foot, I think it's, let's see here. You would have a 6-foot side yard and a 15-foot rear yard. Again, that's consistent with what we're doing in the RTZ and R1 zone. So we're just trying to put those things in alignment with each other. Does anybody have any questions about that?
I'm seeing no lights, John.
Okay.
So thank you for that. Resolutions under planning, we have a PUD request.
Yes,
Item
this
G.
is a planned unit development. This is off of Dayton Boulevard between, oops, that's the wrong note. Excuse me 1 second, y'all. Here we go. Yeah, the 5900 block of Dayton Boulevard between Gadd Road and Highway 153. They're wanting to do basically a townhouse PUD. The site is currently has one single-family house on it. To the south, you have single-family residential. To the north, you've got commercial. There's a Chattanooga appliance business to the north. And to the west, you have some 2-unit residential and commercial. Again, here's some pictures looking into the site. The top 2 photos show you looking into the site. The bottom 2 photos show what's looking to the north and across the street. Again, part of the property is already zoned commercial. The back half is zoned residential. There are some steep slopes on this site. One thing I'm happy to share with y'all is that I would say 90% of the development is outside of the steep sloped area. And so they've basically kept most of the development outside the ridge. The ridge you see is further to the east. So the PUD again shows, as I indicated, they're developing, look at my unit count. 42, thank you, sir, for giving me that detail. 42 units on this property. The Hickson North River Land Use Plan recommends medium business mix and low-density residential for this location. So, and of course, medium business means commercial, low-density residential would mean single-family dwellings with some exceptions for townhouses, patios, and duplexes, and this is a townhouse development. Staff found that this request is compatible with the adopted land use plan, the adjacent uses and surrounding development form. However, there are some sensitive natural resources on the site, so we recommend approval with this condition that no structures or land disturbance in areas dedicated as open space in the submitted PUD plan with the date noted, except for the removal of invasive or dead vegetation and construction of passive trails and pedestrian paths. At Planning Commission, there was no opposition, and they essentially concurred with staff's recommendation.
Very good. Councilman Henderson, I anticipate a light. There you are.
Let me go back to that site plan in case.
So, John, basically the open space is where the steep slopes are.
That's right. If you count, see those lots on the bottom half of the adjacent subdivision? If you count to the 6th lot, lot 16,
Yeah.
That's about where it starts to really pick up in terms of, so they are, I would say 90% of the site is outside of that. So it'd be
So-
limited to minimal grading on the steep slopes.
So without the PUD, they could, I guess, go all the way to the
That is
property
correct.
line and develop onto the steep slopes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Good, Councilman? John, thank you for that. This is an example of how a PUD can be used to increase density and stay off of steep slopes and floodplains, so I'm glad to see we're using this tool to accomplish these goals. All right, that takes us to the end of our items on the agenda, but you want to do area plan updates, or you want to do steep slope and flood?
I'll do a quick one on steep slopes. It's pretty quick.
Okay.
Staff has, we've just completed the two main phases of our analysis on the steep slopes and floodplains portion. A lot of data crunching. I think you'll be pleased to kind of see the statistics we're able to provide. We're now trying to customize it by city council district. So you as council leaders and also the public can kind of see how these dynamics play out in each of the districts. So we've got statistics again on building permits, land disturbing permits, 311 calls. We've also compiled statistics from the recent, there's a draft Hamilton County Emergency Management Plan that has statistics on flooding damages and history of rainfall events. So we'll have some of that information to share. So now we're just trying to distill it. So it's not too much information for folks to absorb in one meeting. So once they get that distilled, we'll be following up with our technical advisory group. So we'll be meeting with some of the UTC staff that we've been working with, as well as our advisory committee. And we'll also be meeting with you as council members individually to go over some of this information with you, to familiarize you with it. But we would anticipate having those meetings in June. So stay tuned. Once those get, we'll be getting with you to schedule those events.
And has the committee wrapped up their meetings yet, or we have?
No, we're still
in it?
Still working. And again, I would say the phase we're in right now is framing the specific issues at this point at a district by district level.
Right.
And once we get that piece done, then we're going to start framing the strategies. So I think it's important, again, we want to reach out to the public and get some of their input regarding some of the issues from the data they're seeing. And then based on that, we'll be framing some strategies for your consideration as a council.
Very good. And again, my personal thanks and this council appreciation for the work the committee's doing on this. This has been a long time coming, and I know that they're putting in a lot of hard work. I say that every time, but I mean it.
Thank you.
And it's a very important task that they're undertaking. Area updates.
Yes, so we could go to, if I could see the PowerPoint. I'm going to first talk about Area 3. Just give you an update where we are with that. This is just a reminder of the scope, quite an extensive area. This is the Area 3 plan that we're working on. And on the right, you see all the neighborhoods that are included in this area plan. Just to give you, again, some general boundaries, the area plan goes to I-24 to the south. It follows the railroad viaduct and the Tennessee River to the west. It goes all the way north to South Chickamauga Creek and to the base of Missionary Ridge on the east. So you can see about 15 neighborhoods or so in that area, quite extensive area. Just a reminder about the process to date. We have just wrapped up our community choices portion of our public meetings. That was in January. We had a kickoff session with the community, and then we had a 2-month period of community surveys where we distributed an online survey as well as hard copy surveys out to the citizens of the area to get their feedback on some of the issues that they identified at the first meeting. And some of the big issues that were identified at the first meeting were these 6 big topics. One is the idea, again, trying to still protect our existing single-family housing. Secondly, providing a diversity of affordable housing. Thirdly, walkable commercial centers. Fourth, parks and greenways. 5, a safe pedestrian realm. And 6, transportation access to services and jobs. Those are kind of like the big thematic issues that came out of that first meeting in June. Based on those topics, we generated a survey that really dug down on those specific issues of commercial centers, housing options, transportation, parks and open space, and new development and jobs. So we put together, we also used an online tool where community members could literally comment directly on an online map on particular issues that were of concern to them. So they could kind of pan around on this map and tag specific issues of concern. We also did some on-site surveys. We went to the YFD centers. Over the course of 2 weeks, we worked with area youth to get their perspective on how they would like to see future development take place in their community. So we had Legos. Staff had fun with playing with Legos with the youth to get some perspective on how they see their communities taking shape. And you can see here, one youth actually gave a drawing talking about wanting to have a safe bike ride from their house to the YFD center. That was something they would like to see. We really are pleased with the responses. We've gotten over 800 responses to our survey. That's both hard copy as well as online. You can see the neighborhood participation. We had participation from every neighborhood, some more than others, but we felt really good about the breadth of participation across the neighborhoods on the survey. Just to give you some sense of the early results, we're not finished with the analysis of the survey results, but just give you some little nuggets. 91% of the respondents, when looking at commercial development, preferred a mixed-use walkable center to a strip commercial, more suburban-style development. 65% of them wanted to see a diversity of new housing that would help support area businesses. Looking at transportation, you can see a balance of folks looking at wanting to prioritize funding for repairing sidewalks, paving roads, and creating bike lanes. So kind of a balanced approach to transportation there. Looking at parks, open space, and greenways, some of the ideas for what amenities they prefer in the park. You can see trees, walking paths, and restrooms were some of the things they identified as a priority. For new development and jobs, in terms of looking at, we know there's some sites in Area 3 that could see some substantial new development. We have some large sites that could be redeveloped. The top choices for how we redevelop those sites, 50% retail, 40% single family, with the remaining looking at parks and multifamily. So those are, again, just some examples, some of the questions we asked. We also asked folks questions about where they would like to see new community centers located to get some feedback from them about that. We're now also crunching statistics in this area. So to give you an example, here is a map showing both, it's kind of hard to read on the screen, but both it's new residential permits. So we're trying to get a feel for where the housing activity, construction activity is currently taking place. We also have statistics on vacant property, so we know where there's opportunities for redevelopment. These red parcels indicate where there's redevelopment opportunities. We're also getting a feeling for the parks and the green spaces in this district. We're also looking at locations that have the best pedestrian access. So a lot of the times what you look for in a center is where's a center that has the most walkable accessibility to it. And so here's another tool that we're using to give us a feel for where we want to designate future centers in the Area 3 plan. And where we are now, we are in the process of actually identifying where potential new centers could be located, where are those core residential areas that we want to protect for single-family residential, where do we need to provide mixed residential? You know, mixed residential includes duplexes, triplexes, eightplexes, garden-style apartments, cottage court developments. So we know we need to accommodate that as part of the mix. So where do we accommodate those kinds of uses? Thinking about open spaces and connections, and also our employment centers. I think one of the advantages of an urban community is you can actually walk to work. You know, and there are some sites here that have some job opportunities that can provide jobs for residents that live in these communities. So where are we looking going forward? We are in the process, as I said, of finalizing the survey results and the analysis. We're going to be doing some preliminary mapping of place types, again, where we think we want to promote conservation of existing residential, where we want to try to promote mixed residential, where we want commercial centers to go. Then we'll be having some workshops in the community to get some feedback on that. So we anticipate that, again, happening sometime in mid to late June. So we're going to be busy in June. Between the steep slopes and floodplains and this, we'll be very busy. But just, again, we look forward to working with you and partnering with our council to move this project forward.
Very good, John. That's job security.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Try.
plenty to do. Councilwoman, I'm sorry, not Councilwoman Coonrod. Anybody affected in District 3, do you have anything you'd like to jump in on? I know it touches three
council districts, yes, sir.
districts. If not, then I had a question. If you go back a couple of slides to
Sure.
where it showed the red zones at vacant property, are those mostly older commercial complexes, C2 zones, or I'm sorry, I didn't mean C2, M1 zones, or?
It's a combination. Clearly, around the railroad, a lot of that's former industrial property.
Sure.
Some along, if you see on the far right, that's along the escarpment of Missionary Ridge. And then I would say what you see scattered is a lot of the vacant sites in neighborhoods. And those, to me, are, again, opportunities. If we're trying to create housing options for folks, we should be looking at those sites for creating housing options for folks.
Absolutely. I think everybody can agree on that. That was my only question there. Thank you, John, for that
Thank you.
presentation. Moving forward.
One more, now looking ahead. If I get the next slide. I'll just say we're done with the area plans. We're not doing any more. I'm just kidding.
Excuse me?
Just kidding. I'm being silly, of course.
I said the job security joke
That's
earlier.
right.
I'm not.
If you recall, about 2 years ago, we had identified about 5 areas that we wanted to focus on. And these 5 areas were identified based on building permit statistics, the date of the plans in terms of how they were being outdated, as well as looking at where there's new infrastructure projects being proposed. So we identified 5. That's Area 12, which is the area you see outlined in green, out in East Brainerd, Ooltewah, Collegedale. Area 11, which is East Brainerd, Hamilton Place. Area 10, which is your Highway 58, Harrison, Tyner community. Area 2, which is Hickson, Red Bank. And Area 3 is what we're referring to now as the historic Riverton Ridge community. That's the one we're working on now, Area 3. We've completed Area 12. We're about halfway through Area 3. And so now we want to take sight on the next 3 to get accomplished. And just want to share with you that our next 2 that we're going to work on are Area 11 and 10. And the reason we're looking at those 2 has to do with the growth at Volkswagen. Volkswagen is going to be announcing, it's already announced, expansion of jobs. We also know that the Bonnie Oaks Drive is going to be widened in the near future, and that's going to have major implications for the land use of the area. So we thought it would be good to do Area 10 and 11 in tandem. So we'll be getting those 2 plans started, I would say sometime in mid to late summer. We'll be kicking those off. And then once those are completed, we'll move on to Area 2, and that will complete our first 5. So the good news is once we get those 5 done, we're almost halfway through getting the plans updated countywide.
Very good. And I'm excited to see, obviously, Area 11 with the growth that we're experiencing in the East Brainerd area. So it's long overdue. I think we're working on a land use plan of about 20 years old. So,
I see some long faces.
yeah, Jerry likes to do that.
Okay.
Jerry,
Okay.
Jerry loves it. He loves it. All right. John, anything else you need to add before we
That's
close
all.
out? Any other comments from the council you'd like to?
I will say one other thing, and I don't want to forget that because I saw Councilwoman Burrs, make sure I didn't want to forget. The Airport District Plan is another project we're working on. We'll be having our community meeting in June to wrap that project up. And so, as always, I'll be following up with Councilwoman Burrs and Councilman Gilbert before we get there. But as soon as we set the date, I'll let you guys know, and we'll be coordinating on that as well.
We didn't want to leave her left out. I'm there. So, thank you, John. Any other comments you'd like to make? Councilman Mitchell, you good? Okay, very good. If no other business to be done here, I will adjourn us till 6. Hey, Phil? Yes, sir. You're meeting with Attorney Anderson, Is that like in the last couple of weeks? Okay, so that meeting has already taken place.
I actually had a meeting with him on here. We met with the folks